You ever film a video and you hate it, so you have to start again? That's how today's going. Also, it's fall. I realize it's not fall, but also it's fall. I'm telling you right now. And I'm very tired, so I'm talking kind of quietly. I read 4 books in August. This is my August reading wrap-up that I am filming in mid-September, but we're good, we're fine. So yeah, I read 4 books. 3 of them were nonfiction and 3 of them were audiobooks, and then one of them was fiction and physical copy. Okay, so I'll just do nonfiction first. The first one I read was Spin Dictators, The Changing Face of Tyranny in the 21st Century by Daniel Treisman and Sergei Guriev, Sergei, okay, Sergei. So this book, I think the tagline explains it really well. Essentially, the authors, I guess they wrote a study at some point and then now they're making it into a book, which is fairly common, where they're taking a look and comparing traditional dictators, what they would describe as fear dictators, which are heavily associated with the 20th century, and they're comparing modern dictators, who they call spin dictators, essentially people who are able to spin public support, opinion, news, even like international relationships in a way to be like, oh, we're not a violent dictator, we're beloved by our people, and they're able to maintain power in this kind of more understated way. I think an example of this is in the 20th century, you saw a lot of dictators who fashioned themselves as like military leaders, and they would often have like Trujillo, right, and how he would have like all the like military things, and then you compare now where dictators tend to be like wearing a suit and a tie and they're very professional coded. So I will say, the reason why I wanted to pick up this book is because one of the authors was saying that Putin has moved, he's actually like, he was a spin dictator, but now he's actually like graduated to a fear dictator. So I will say that like part of me read this book knowing it would be slightly outdated, but I also think in general this book is really good maybe if you're a Westerner who doesn't know a lot about these dictatorships and you're wondering like, oh, why was Putin able to not have such media pressure to, I don't know, I feel like anyone who knew, like, was actually paying attention to Vladimir Putin was like, okay, yeah, that guy's crazy, but a lot of people weren't, and I still think if you don't know, this book might be helpful. But I think if you're informed, if you have any close connection to a country with a spin dictator, then a lot of this information will not feel particularly revolutionary, but maybe for people in the West who just don't have their finger on the pulse of that stuff, it will feel somehow novel. And then after that, I read The Disordered Cosmos, Journey into Dark Matter, Spacetime, and Dreams Deferred by Chanda Prescott-Weinstein, who is a theoretical physicist. This book combines not only talking about their love for science and physics and space and quarks, stuff I don't understand, but it also includes just a conversation about the landscape of science and physics and how, as much as we like to imagine these hard sciences as being above racism and sexism, etc., in fact it is still very much present. And I think that there's several great conversations about the ways in which you know, racism and sexism still affect science today. And I think a couple of call outs to me is, so Dr. Prescott-Weinstein, they're Black, and so for them, you know, they are always trying to help and uplift other other upcoming Black academics or Black scientists or Black students, and so they have to put on all of this like free labor, emotional labor. They have to help lift these people up, and it is at no extra pay, and it sometimes can impede their ability to be a protected academic to get tenure, etc., etc. And I think it just shows the extra labor that can need to be done, especially if you want to help and your community and get more people like you in that space to do the kind of science you think is really important. I also like the conversation about, like I think it was in Hawaii, they were trying to put up a observatory, and they were trying to do it on like indigenous land, and so it's like, okay, you know, it can be important to do stuff, but you can't do that in a way that like ignores these people and their relationship. Like I don't know, I think that conversation of like at what lengths, like to where does science overstep its bounds, how do we incorporate science and also respecting people. Like I think there's a lot of people out there who are just like, screw it, science is worth, like learning stuff is worth it. And I think that, I don't know, I think this book had a lot to say about that. I think it was quite good. Like I said, it was a lot of mix of science, of like really hard science that was like I just don't know about, and so for me it was like slightly challenging to follow along in those areas, but there was a lot of like personal anecdotes and stories that I think help contextualize and explain some of the conversations that were had about the like hard part of the science. After that, I read The Aquariums of Pyongyang, 10 Years in a North Korean Gulag, and this was written by Pierre Rigouleau and Chow-Hwan. And so it's a pretty standard North Korean defector story, except here it also includes this I think that like the narrative voice, right? It's a nonfiction book, so the guy, Chow-Hwan, it's talking about his time, again, being in one of these camps and then leaving and how he's able to get out. And it's a, yeah, when I say standard, I know I've read like Camp 14, I've read In Order to Live, and there's obviously, similar to Camp 14, right, the experiences of being in a labor camp, the horrible stuff that happened there, and I think just a conversation about the psychology of power and abuse of power. I think that was very well had there. I think it was, yeah, I think there was just a lot to say about like the dynamics of being in such a desperate and desolate situation, and I think too, one thing that made me kind of, I don't want to say laugh, but like in the like foreword or whatever, the guy kind of thanks George W. Bush and kind of implies that he thinks like God sent George W. Bush to save North Korea, and I think that's very interesting, and it kind of reminded me of like the whole conversation around Yeonmi Park, who for a lot of people they see her as this like super right-wing grifter, but I think, and like I'm not saying she's not that, but I do think that there's, maybe I'm being kind of soft, but like I see this person who escaped a socialist communist country, and like I don't think it's surprising that in some ways she is conservative and coming to the, like, I think that's kind of obvious that she would probably be really conservative and really afraid of like left-leaning liberal politics. Again, I don't agree with her on a lot of, I don't think we have to agree with her or like like I don't think, yeah, we're able to disagree with her, but I think that when people, I don't know, I think that a lot of people don't have like an amount of sympathy that I do think they should have for someone like her, given what she went through, which I think honestly anyone leaving North Korea has had a bad time. I don't think it's good for anyone there, but yeah, I think if you've read other stuff, like this is just if you're interested in the topic, this would be a good read for you. And then lastly, the only translated lit by a woman that I read in Women in Translation Month, Mieko Kawakami, All the Lovers in the Night, I believe translated by David Boyd and Sam Bett. Standard Kawakami, I enjoy Kawakami, but I don't know, I think in rating this in terms of like breasts and eggs, I definitely really love breasts and eggs. I also felt like Heaven was slightly more dynamic than this book. I think that this book was maybe didn't go as far as I would like it to go, and I've noticed that one thing that Kawakami often does is she has a main character who is like almost blank and flat, and then everyone else around them is like saying things. So it's like we're exploring these different opinions through this other character, and our blank slate character is kind of just like sitting there. And I think it was just a little bit more visible in this particular story. But I do like the ending, and I thought that I was surprised by the ending. It's not where I expected it to go, but I enjoyed where it went a lot. Yeah, so again, not necessarily my favorite Kawakami. Glad I read it, and now I have all these interviews by her that I need to watch because, like I said, I had saved a bunch and they were all about this book that I hadn't read yet. Yeah, so that's all the books I read in August. Currently, I'm like currently reading several books, but currently I'm reading Wound by Oksana Vasyakina, or Vasyakina. I don't know, obviously. And this is kind of a Russian queer as they lay dying, wherein the main character, who it's very clear that this is actually like an Oksana stand-in because it's like incredibly autobiographical in that way, even though it's not autobiographical, it is autobiographical. She's taking an urn with her mother's ashes back to the town that she was like grew up in Siberia. The story revolves around her relationship with her mother, her relationship with her mother's death, her views on love, her views on being a lesbian in Russia, and her like toxic relationships that she's had. It also relates to her views on art and creation and writing, and I think it's very hard to read, but it's very good. And I think that I don't know, I'm kind of curious to see at some point this talks about like her relationship with her country, and I haven't gone to that part yet. Like, I think there's a lot of conversation around poverty, but there hasn't been conversations about being queer in Russia yet. And I'm like, I don't know, there's like a small part in the beginning, but I don't really count that given how important the topic is, so we'll see. Otherwise, I think that's like, you shouldn't have included that in the dust jacket saying like, oh, she talks about her country. Especially given all that you could say about being queer in Russia today. So that's it. That's it for this video. I hope to see you again in my next one. Have a great day.